see in the months that follow the results of all of this actually reflected in reality.
And on Angolan investment, recently President Biden announced $2 billion investment for Angola. Will there be any more investment coming from Angola, or what the president really expects from this investment that he announced many times for Angola?
So he really expects that you will see a major deployment of solar power in Angola. That was a significant project that was facilitated by funding and mechanisms from the United States government. So he's looking forward to seeing that actually come to fruition. At the summit, he will have a series of other announcements that benefit a wide range of countries in Africa, some of which also will come to the benefit of Angola. I will leave those to the specific sessions in which each of these announcements will be laid out, but you will see projects in health, in climate, in trade, in investment, in infrastructure, and in many other areas, including security cooperation, that range from every significant region of Africa benefiting from different parts of what the president and his team will lay out over the next few days.
In Equatorial Guinea, Jake, will finally the U.S. say something about the more than $19 million that the Equatorial Guinea paid to the U.S. government for vaccines, but those vaccines were never sent to Equatorial Guinea? Will this time the U.S. government say something about this money that is already in the U.S. government, but they never sent the vaccines to Equatorial Guinea, and the people still waiting for those vaccines?
We will have the opportunity to speak with the delegation from Equatorial Guinea about any misunderstandings or misconceptions that may lie at the heart of your question. Yes.
Thank you so much, Jake. Thanks for talking about Africa with us. First of all, as you know, a lot of African countries have held the line against condemning Russia. Has the U.S. communicated any possible consequences of maintaining that stance? Does any of that $55 billion play into that? What are the consequences if they continue to not choose a side in this?
Look, we're not putting a gun to anyone's head. We believe that the war in Ukraine is a matter of principle, and it's not an American principle. It's a principle we all signed up to in the United Nations Charter. It's a principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity. So we will make the case with passion and persistence to every country in the world that they should speak out against these flagrant violations of the UN Charter. But we're not imposing conditionality from the point of view of this summit on decisions that sovereign countries make in this regard. We believe that we have actually been successful in pressing this case. In fact, from the first significant General Assembly vote of 141 countries condemning the invasion to the second significant General Assembly vote where you actually had an increase, 143 countries, even after several months in which people were describing, flagging international support for Ukraine, the numbers went up. And we think that that is because countries recognize there are deeper principles at stake. That's how we're approaching this. We're not approaching this from the point of view of coercing other countries. That's not how the United States is going to operate with respect to countries in Africa. It's not how we have operated.
And the
yes.
Elections, Jake, you mentioned the 2023 elections in Africa. Can you just highlight the ones that you're concerned about and how the U.S. is going to work with these countries? I'm thinking of Congo, Sudan, and South Sudan that are having big ones next year.
So,
what are you going to do to make space for them to have these elections?
I want to be clear that having a meeting about elections in 2023 is not about us raising the alarm bell or claiming, we've got concerns and then solutions. It's rather to say, there are important elections coming up. We would like to do everything we can to support those elections being free, fair, and credible. And that goes for every election taking place in 2023, not picking and choosing certain ones and setting other ones aside. So the meeting is designed to indicate that the United States is focused on being supportive of free, fair, and credible elections everywhere they are taking place in Africa in 2023.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a couple of questions.
Thank you, Jake. Another protester was executed in Iran, this time in a public square. He was hanged, and his trial was described as a sham. His accusation was he was waging a war against God. What can the U.S. do to support these protesters who bravely participating in these demonstrations, but they're being killed or arrested? And second, can you update us on any potential meeting between you or the president with the families of the American Iranian hostages who've been held in Tehran, and they've been asking for a meeting with you?
So I have had a chance to meet with the Namazi family. I have had a chance to meet with Murad Tabaz's family. And in just the next few days, I will also have a chance to meet with Ahmad Sharji's family. So I've already, in the past, through Zoom, in person, on the phone, engaged deeply with many people who have been personally affected by their family members being detained, unjustly, unlawfully detained in Iran. And this is something that I personally, as National Security Advisor, am deeply committed to across the board. I've spent dozens, if not hundreds of hours working on these cases, meeting with these families, and I will continue to do so as we go forward. And I make it a policy that any family that seeks a meeting at the White House with me will get one. Sometimes there are scheduling issues, but over the course of the past year, I have had the opportunity to meet with so many families from hostages and detainees in Russia and Afghanistan, Venezuela, Iran, and China and other places as well, and I'll continue to do that. On the question of what we are doing with respect to supporting the protesters in Iran, we have had a drumbeat of announcements relative to sanctions against those who are perpetrating these gross human rights abuses and this repression. We haven't just done so ourselves. We have coordinated and aligned with other countries around the world, building an international chorus of condemnation against what is happening. In addition, we have taken steps to try to facilitate the ability of Iranians to communicate both among themselves and then to communicate to the outside world what is happening in their country so that we can shine a bright light on and hold accountable those who are responsible. We will continue to do these things, and right from the president, who has spoken very directly, clearly, and passionately on this subject on down, this government has made clear where it stands. It stands on the side of the rights of peaceful protesters, the rights of women to seek to vindicate their human dignity, and the rights of people everywhere to speak out on behalf of a better life, and we will continue to do that.
But you pull your punches on China, and you won't say the same thing for the protests there, will you?
Well, we have spoken about the protests in China and called for peaceful protests. We have spoken about Xinjiang. We've spoken about what's happened in Hong Kong. And in fact, what's just happened with respect to Jimmy Lai is, in our view, a violation of the basic law and the commitments that China made with respect to autonomy for Hong Kong. So this administration does have a very strong set of principles and actions that we've taken over the course of the past 2 years with respect to the People's Republic of China and the question of human rights.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to ask you about the African Leader Summit, but first, just a quick follow-up. I'm curious, does the administration consider Victor Bout to be a terrorist?
Well, he's not listed as a specially designated national. What we consider him to have been was a convicted criminal, convicted of arms trafficking and other crimes, to serve a sentence. He served 12 years in detention. He was set to be released in 2029. And of course, before we make any determination about whether to send somebody back as part of a deal to get an American home, we make a determination about the national security implications of that. We did that assessment in this case. We believe we can manage those challenges, but we will remain constantly vigilant against any threat that Victor Bout may pose to Americans, to the United States going forward. We also would just point out that there is no shortage of arms traffickers and mercenaries in Russia who pose challenges and threats to the international order, to the United States and otherwise, and we are vigilant about that as well, which is why we have built, alongside our allies and partners, such a robust policy in dealing with the threats posed by Russia.
Question about the African Leader Summit. As China looks to increase its influence on that continent, I'm curious, will the president seek to deliver any kind of message or word of warning to these African leaders that Beijing, whether it's through their financing or economic or military aid, is not in fact a faithful ally or partner?
This is going to be about what we can offer. It's going to be a positive proposition about the United States' partnership with Africa. It's not going to be about other countries. It's not going to be attempting to compare or contrast. It's rather going to be about the affirmative agenda that the United States has to bring to bear with Africa. Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. I went around yesterday to see how much African leaders were paying for the hotel for this trip, and I realized that some of the hotels in DC were charging them up to $22,000 a night. So it's an expensive trip. Some of them will spend $50 million for countries where people live on less than a US dollar a day. And so my question is, if they have to spend all this money and travel thousands of miles, why didn't the White House plan one-on-one meeting with those African leaders?
Well, first, the president will have the chance to greet every single African leader and engage with them as they come for the dinner tomorrow night. Second, if you look at the substance of this summit, the sessions that he is going to sit with those leaders around the table and deal with, it is the things that they have asked to talk about that he will be talking about with them. And those leaders will have the opportunity to speak in those sessions to President Biden and to one another so that we can collectively come up with a common strategy to deliver for the people of Africa. And if you look at what substance this summit is going to deliver, from the business forum all the way through to the leader sessions, I believe that it is going to be 3 days where you will see put on display real, tangible deliverables and results that are going to improve people's lives. And ultimately, as I said before, I will ask you, judge us on the record of how that ends up playing out, but I'm confident that it is going to play out well.
Jake, my final question, Jake, if I can ask.
Title 42 is expiring. Do you see a national security, are there national security concerns over the Title 42 expiration?
So the team has been working very hard to ensure that we are taking steps to be able to manage the expiration of Title 42 and to put in place a process that will be orderly and humane. And we believe that in doing so, we can protect our national security concerns. That is a process that others can speak to better than I can, but from my perspective, the issues related to ensuring an orderly, humane migration process at the border are being persistently and constantly addressed through the interagency process, and we are working through what the procedures will be in place at the moment of expiration on the 21st.
Does the U.S. government have any sense of how many people are coming across that there is no visibility on? How many people are crossing that you have no idea who they are?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
How many people crossing the border that the U.S. government has no idea? Like estimates of how many people crossing aren't giving their name, aren't giving IDs, aren't able to verify who they are.
So we do have estimates of how many encounters there are at the border on a daily basis. We have processes and procedures in place to identify those individuals, to process them in an orderly fashion, and then to do what is appropriate based on that processing. And we have believed that that system is a system that does an effective job of being able to determine who is coming across the border and what the right way to deal with their case is. Yes.
Thank you, Jake. On the IRA issue, the last time at the CSIS conference, you mentioned that you will have some kind of solution for the IRA, but you haven't heard. Regarding the issue of subsidy exclusion for South Korean electric vehicles, under the IRA, what kind of talks are going on with South Korea now, and what solution does the United States have for mutual benefit as an economic alliance with South Korea?
So we have had extensive consultations with the Republic of Korea on the Inflation Reduction Act, and in particular the relevant provisions related to electric vehicles. Those have been constructive conversations. They've happened at multiple levels, including a discussion between our two presidents. And we feel confident that we can get to a place of understanding and where both of our countries' economic interests will be taken into account. And we will see that unfold in the coming days and weeks. This is a big, complex piece of legislation. Not everything gets resolved in a day, a week, or a month, but we believe that we will ultimately have a long-term approach that vindicates the economic interests and needs of American workers and businesses and of our ally in the Republic of Korea. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jay. All right, I know we're kind of running out of time, so I'll do two things at the top and take a few more questions for folks. Many of you have been asking about plans for tomorrow's bill signing. Tomorrow, President Biden will sign the Bipartisan Respect for Marriage Act into law at a celebration on the South Lawn with thousands in attendance. In May 2012, then Vice President Biden made history when he said, and I quote, "This is all about a simple proposition. Who do you love? Who do you love and who you'll be loyal to to the person you love. Will you be loyal to the person you love?" End quote. The Respect for Marriage Act helps ensure that proposition is fully realized in the United States. It will give peace of mind to millions of LGBTQI+ and interracial couples who will finally be guaranteed the rights and protections to which they and their children are entitled to. The legislation also enjoys support from a majority of Americans across party lines and faiths. Tomorrow, the president will be joined by a bipartisan group of lawmakers as well as advocates and plaintiffs in marriage equality cases across the country to sign this critical legislation into law. There will be musical guests and performances to celebrate this historic bill, and the president will also note that there is much more work to be done to protect the LGBTQI+ individuals across the country, and including passing the Equality Act as well. And before we go into questions, I have one more thing that I want to address from here is about what the president, you've heard what the president has been focusing on, which is rallying the world diplomatically. You heard that from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and continue to reestablish American leadership abroad, protecting people's constitutional rights by codifying marriage equality, as I just discussed. But what is in the incoming House Republican majority doing? One of their leaders, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is saying, quote, "If Steve Bannon and I organized January 6th, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed." This is what is coming from a member of Congress. And what's more, she said to a group that lashed out against condemning Holocaust denial, they were giving her an award. You have all heard the president warn about awful conspiracy theories and violent rhetoric that used to be undermined, which undermine the rule of law in our democracy. It is just antithetical to our values as a country for a member of Congress to wish that the carnage of January 6th had been even worse, and to brag that they would have succeeded in an armed insurrection against the United States government. Violent rhetoric like this is also a slap in the face of the Capitol Police, the D.C. Metropolitan Police, the National Guard, and the families who lost loved ones as a result of the attack on the Capitol. And this is someone who is expected to have their committee positions restored. So we should let that sink in. Again, this is coming from a member of Congress. All leaders have a responsibility to condemn these dangerous, vile remarks and stand for our Constitution and also for the rule of law. With that, Sungmin.
Who are the musical guests tomorrow? You're not going to tell us that?
I'm not going to share. Don't want to take away from the excitement, but it's going to be a celebrated event as the president signs this historic piece of legislation into law. And as I stated, there'll be thousands of people there. And of course, we'll have musical guests, and it'll be a bipartisan also, bipartisan event and attended by lawmakers who helped to make this happen. And this is a reminder, if I may add, how when we do reach across the aisle, there are things that we can get done, historic pieces of legislation that we can get done, and we have seen that under this president. So I think that's important to note as well. Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to get the White House's perspective on the current government funding talks. Schumer talked about doing a one-week CR. Democrats were going to release their own legislation but held off. does the White House see these as encouraging signs for being able to get a broad omnibus by the end of the month?
So look, we continue to encourage Congress to get a bipartisan deal done. We believe on the government funding. We believe there is still enough time to get that done. This is something that clearly Congress was able to do this time last year in a bipartisan way. But if they need extra days to get there, so be it. We got to remember this is not a partisan issue. The issues that we are talking about, we talk about national security. We just had Jake Sullivan here, as I just noted a second ago. We talk about public education. We talking about health care. These are, and veteran health services, to be even more specific, these are priorities for the American people. These are bipartisan issues that are critical to American individuals just across the country. So again, we encourage Congress to reach a bipartisan deal.
I had another Africa Summit question. Reuters has reported in recent days that the Nigerian army has been running a secret, systematic, and illegal abortion program in the country since 2013. Do you expect that to be a topic of discussion with the Nigerian delegation to the summit?
Again, Jake laid out how each individual African leader will have an opportunity to talk and discuss and have conversations with the president, who he very much looks forward to doing that. I'm not going to get ahead on what may come up, may not come up. We've laid out pretty extensively, at least the top lines, as you've just heard from Jake, what we believe our goals are. We talked about the $55 billion that we, in new funding, that we'll be providing to the continent in the next three years, which we believe is incredibly important. We talked about Johnny Carson, who is going to be the leader in making sure that what comes out, the deliverables that come out of this summit, is actually delivered, if you will. And so, look, we are committed to this. Not going to get ahead of that particular conversation, but certainly that's something that we're monitoring. Oh.
Jacob mentioned a little bit about the discussion on trying to free Paul Whelan. Is this administration drawing a line in trading any type of sanctions relief to secure Paul Whelan's release when it comes to Ukraine?
Yeah, look, when it comes to Ukraine, and Jake said this, when it comes to Ukraine, we are pretty we've been, pretty emphatic about this, pretty steadfast, that we are going to, as a matter of the right thing to do, as a matter of protecting a country's democracy and lifting up and making sure that the people of Ukraine have what they need to fight for their freedom, fight for their sovereignty. This is something that we've been doing clearly with our allies and partners. That won't change, and Jake kind of laid that out, I think, pretty clearly. As it relates to what we're discussing, what is being negotiated, when it as it relates to Paul Whelan and getting him home, I'm not going to get into negotiations from here. I'm not going to get into specifics, as Jake laid out as well. Look, we are committed to getting Americans who were being wrongfully detained and held hostage abroad home. That is a promise that this president has made. We have seen that across the almost 2 years of his presidency, with Brittany Griner, with Trevor Reed just in April. And so we're going to continue that and have those conversations, but in private, certainly not going to lay them out from here.
To ask about the attack on the substation in North Carolina and whether the White House believes that the federal government should regulate substation security.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sure, let me take my mask off. I said I wanted to ask about the substation attack in North Carolina and whether the White House believes that the federal government should regulate security at substations instead of leaving it up to states and the individual utility companies.
So look, I'm not going to, I know the Department of Energy is looking into this, the Department of Justice is looking into this. There is they're reviewing this process. I'm not going to get ahead of that. I would certainly refer you to those two agencies, but just not going to get ahead as they're reviewing that process. Okay.
What's the president's thinking right now about the National Defense Authorization Act and the vaccine requirement? And clearly his position on vaccines is well known, and there's a long history of signing and passing the NDAA? Where's he at with that?
So look, we've been very clear about what we saw happen with the vaccine mandate basically being removed or from the NDAA. We thought it was a mistake. We think that Republicans in Congress have decided that they'd rather fight against the health and well-being of our troops than protecting them. And again, it was a mistake. As it relates to the NDAA, we're not going to get ahead. The Senate is going to take this up, so we're not going to get ahead of the Senate process. But I've said this before. Look, when in the past, every year when the NDA comes up, there are some provisions we support, some that we do not. The president will judge the bill in its entirety, so not going to get ahead of what the president's action is going to be. But we've been very clear about how we see the vaccine mandate.
Can I ask you two things, just check-ins on a couple of big policy issues? One is on Friday, the administration issued a fairly strong rebuke of a WTO decision that essentially said the steel and aluminum tariffs in place violated international rules. I just want to make sure I understand where the administration stands on steel and aluminum tariffs. And does it mean that essentially you all intend for those tariffs to remain in place indefinitely?
So I saw that reporting, and so what we say from here. So we strongly reject the flawed interpretation and conclusions in the World Trade Organization panel reports that we saw that you're laying out there. The United States has held the clear and unequivocal position for over 70 years that issues of national security cannot be reviewed in WTO dispute settlement. The Biden administration is committed to preserving U.S. national security by ensuring the long-term viability of our steel and aluminum industries, and we do not intend to remove the Section 232 duties as a result of these disputes. Again, we reject the flawed interpretation that's been laid out.
Relatedly, I know there was a lot of talk earlier this summer about the broad sweeping scale of China tariffs, and there was some expectation that those might be revisited after the president's visit. Do you have any update or timeline on what's going on, I guess, with the China tariffs as they are?
No, I appreciate the question, and I understand as it relates to this, don't have anything to preview on that particular topic.
More than 70 members of Congress sent a letter to the president on Friday asking him to take executive action to guarantee the rail workers paid sick leave. Is it clear that there are steps that can be taken through executive action, or has the White House determined that this is something that Congress can only do?
So first I want to say, the president is grateful to Congress for taking action to avert a rail shutdown and implement the benefits he helped secure for rail workers in the tentative agreement. So we are grateful to Congress for doing that. He's also grateful to Senator Sanders and Representative Bowman's continued advocacy for paid sick leave. The president has pressed Congress to advance the cause of paid sick leave throughout his administration. We've had many debates and discussions from the podium about his efforts in that realm. He's exploring all options here while working to build on existing bipartisan support in Congress to make paid sick leave a reality for all workers, including rail workers as well. Again, we are going to look at all options here.
It is possible that executive action could be taken. You haven't ruled that out, that it can't be done.
Don't have anything to announce or lay out on how we're going to move forward. What I can say is we are going to look at all options, and we are very, very grateful to Congress for helping to avert this rail shutdown, which would, as you all know, would have had and really disturbed our economy in a way that would have been not great, not helpful, clearly for American families across the country. And look, this is an issue that the president has been fighting for when it comes to paid leave for all Americans throughout the last almost 2 years of his administration, and we're going to continue to look at all options.
Has the president been briefed on the news coming out of the Department of Energy tomorrow on the fusion development at the Livermore lab?
So just a couple of things on that. As you know, the Department of Energy's analysis is still ongoing. So I'm unable to provide details of confirmation at this time. Secretary Granholm will have more details to share tomorrow when the process is complete. I'm not going to get ahead of that at this time.
Is the president going to have the end of year press conference? If so, when? If not, why not?
Say that, I'm so sorry, say that
The
one more
president going
time.
to have the end of year press conference.
End of year.
Oh, I'm so sorry, end of year conference.
Not why not?
I don't have anything to preview on that or to announce on an end of year press conference. When we do, if we will, certainly we'll share that with you. Okay, thank you for your question. I'll take a couple more. Go ahead, Courtney.
Thank you. The foreign traveler vaccine requirement is set to expire at the end of the month. Is the president going to renew it? Are you going to let it expire? What's the next steps?
Don't have anything to preview on the next steps on that particular question. Once we do, we'll certainly share that.
And I also wanted to ask you about the ongoing negotiations in Congress about the child tax credit. Can you talk about where you are on that and what some of the sticking points have been?
So as I said over a month ago, I believe from the podium, our position is simple. If Congress is going to extend tax cuts and tax breaks for business in the lame duck, they must include tax relief for working families. That's the way we see this process moving forward. Some sort of tax credit for children is the most direct way to do that. And as I have noted before, there are several proposals from both Democrats and also Republicans to provide such relief. It is not clear to us if Congress has an interest in pushing a tax bill in the remaining 2 weeks. Our point is simple: no tax breaks for businesses without tax relief for working families and children, and that's where we're going to continue to be on this.
And if I can follow up with one more, do you feel that, I know that some of the conversation has been around limits for the child tax credit on who qualifies based on income. Do you feel that the IRS or Treasury would be prepared to administer such a tax credit given all the different demands that they have and now adding on more restrictions as opposed to it was much more broad earlier?
So I'm not going to get ahead of what the process might look like. What I can say, definitively of how we see this process moving forward, at least in Congress. Again, we are, we're not clear if this is going to happen, but we've pretty much laid out our belief or how we see this moving, which is no tax breaks for businesses without tax relief for working families and children. I'm just not going to get ahead of what can potentially, how this process is going to work through the federal government if and when this were to happen. Go ahead, Alex, in the back.
Thank you, Karine. As you know, Elon Musk launched a series of attacks on Dr. Anthony Fauci over the weekend, calling for his prosecution, and then he shared some other memes about him and suggested he's lying about the origins of the coronavirus. What's your response, first of all, specifically to the attacks on Dr. Fauci, and second, how is your view of Twitter as a sort of public forum and a forum for yourself and for the president and many other officials here? How are those views evolving?
So look, we've been very clear about this. These attacks, these personal attacks that we have been seeing are dangerous on Dr. Fauci and other public health professionals as well. They are disgusting and they are divorced from reality. And we will continue to call that out and be very clear about that. Again, these are incredibly dangerous, these personal attacks that we are seeing. Dr. Fauci has served under 7 Republican and Democratic presidents. We cannot forget that. He has given his almost entire career to civil service, as a public servant. His work on infectious disease from HIV/AIDS to COVID has saved countless lives. And, it's unfortunate that he has, we are fortunate, I should say, that he has devoted his career and his life and his exceptional talent to America's public health. And that's what should be discussed right now. That's what we should be thankful to him about. And again, these are incredibly dangerous and should be called out. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Karine. Appreciate it. We know the Respect for Marriage Act is going to be signed tomorrow on the South Lawn. But, and the president himself, he told me the other day that he disagrees with Catholic bishops. The bishops, of course, believe that it will harm religious freedom. That said, it's going to be signed. We know it's a done deal. But what does the president say to religious organizations who fear they will now be targeted or discriminated against by the government for their beliefs in traditional marriage?
So, look, on his first day in the White House, the president signed an executive order on preventing the combating discrimination against LGBTQI+ Americans. And that EO has led key agencies including HUD, HHS, ED, DOJ, and CFPB to strengthen non-discrimination protections in housing, healthcare, education, criminal systems, and credit and lending services. And so I say that because he has been so committed to this issue from the beginning of his administration. And when you look at this piece of legislation that has been passed, it actually addresses also the question that you're asking and takes that into account. But look, tomorrow's going to be a really important day for many Americans, millions of Americans across the country, and I think we cannot forget that. But I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I have a question on the African Leaders Summit. My colleague already asked this question, but I want to ask you about, it is no secret that China has bigger influence and more investment, more trade with Africa. And I understand this summit is not about specific countries, but it's about sending a affirmative message. But I want to ask you, what kind of role do you expect for this summit to play in terms of competing the influence over Africa against China?
Look, I want to be very careful here. I'm not going to go beyond what what Jake just stated. It's not going to be about China. It's going to be about Africa. We worked very closely with African nations, as Jake said, and also the African Union about what is important that they want to talk about and discuss with the president. Not just the president, the vice president, our cabinet secretaries. And so that's going to be the focus. That's why we announced the $55 billion. That's why we announced someone who is going to make sure that over the next couple of years, as we continue to move forward with our relationship with Africa, that things that we discussed, our deliverables, will occur, will happen, and showing our commitment. And so I think that's where we want to stay. That's what we want to focus on how we can move that relationship forward and what we can do to assist the continent. All right, thanks everybody. See you tomorrow.